Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am your host, Mike Malatesta. On this podcast, I dig in deep with every guest to get to the roots of their success, to discover not just how it happened, but why it matters. My mission is to expose the ideas and clues you need to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you. Today I'm talking to Gary Mottershead. Gary is an exceptional entrepreneur, but he wasn't on that path all the time. In fact, he started his career in the corporate world and was doing really, really well. Something happened that made him want to or need to take the leap, as he calls it, into becoming an entrepreneur and building an exponential organization. I think you're going to like Gary. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. So happy to have you here, as I am every week. And I have another amazing success story to share with you. I've got Gary Mottershead on the podcast with me. Gary, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mike. Delighted to be with you. You paid me the favor of being on mine, so I'm delighted to be back on with yours now.
Yeah, and well, thank you for that. And it was an honor to be on your show as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Gary so that you can get as excited as I am. So Gary Mottershead is an engineer, an entrepreneur, an author, and an Abundance 360 member. And you've heard me talk about abundance before. With his background in manufacturing and chemical engineering, Gary believes it's important for specialists to consider themselves entrepreneurs first. In 1999, Gary founded GCP Industrial Products, which has grown to become the largest importer of sheet rubber into North America. And by the way, Gary, it's really nice to have someone on the podcast who has what I call a normal business. That's kind of my background, normal, like businesses with stuff. And it's nice to have another entrepreneur on here with stuff. So Gary, I don't know where I ended there, but I'll just say it's the largest importer. I think I said that. So today, that company has moved away from just being stuff, and it's become a forward-thinking, digital-first inspired industry leader. GCP sources materials from various countries around the world and was one of the first to make inroads into China. Gary has also been a strategic coach client for over 30 years. And you hear me talk about strategic coach all the time, and an associate coach for over 25 years. And Gary would be you're only the second associate coach that I've had on the show. Teresa Easler was my coach. And so I had Teresa on the show some time ago. Gary and his wife are proud grandparents and the parents of two entrepreneurial grown children. So Gary, I start every show with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
Well, Mike, first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, and honored also to be on here with Teresa, who I was just with recently. And Teresa calls me her older brother. And that's because I think I'm 20 days older than she is. So, and we've been at Strategic Coach together a long time. Great. So yeah, how did it happen? As I was saying briefly before we got on, I'm going to tell the story of how I became an entrepreneur, because it's not the same for everybody. And it's not a one-time aspect of a journey. And I'll recall that when I was working, I had spent a couple of years at Imperial Oil, the Exxon subsidiary in Canada, in the chemicals business. And then I moved on to DuPont in industrial sales. And I really enjoyed DuPont, the DuPont Corporation. And I was moving up the ladder there. And I was a sales manager. And I was in a meeting one day with not my boss, but my boss's boss, the VP, man who was probably twice my size, physical stature, and very aggressive, driven man, and appreciated working for him. And we were in a meeting with a customer one day, and I happened to know a little bit about the customer that he didn't. There had dealt with them in the oil business years before. And we were in a battle at that point in time to be able to save. We're supplying plastic resins. You talk about stuff, plastic resin to be able to make gas pipelines and underground piping. And one of our competitors wanted to buy our resin. So we're in there talking to them. And I was in that meeting and I knew that it wasn't quite totally on the up and up, that I figured they wanted to buy our resin to be able to discredit everything we had done. And which meant we would have to tear up in Canada, the province of Saskatchewan, at least. And at that point in time, which is going back more than 35 years ago, it was going to be $8 or $9 million, not my money. And I remember being in the meeting and my boss looks at me, VP looks at me and says, as they said something, said, "Gary, isn't that right?" And I just said, "No, John, that's not right. You could have cut the air with a knife. It was so frozen and so cold." And that's what I called an SCI, a serious career impediment. Because in an organization like that, it doesn't matter. It's not your money. What does it care? You're only going to sell it. But I don't know if it's in my ethics or whatever it was such that I said, I just can't let this go because I know we weren't going to be able to deal with it. And I ended up in a battle with CSA, the Canadian Standards Association, to make sure the resins and everything were correct. But that was just because I realized that at that point, Mike, I realized that my motivation was different. So that was kind of the first nail in the coffin. And then spin it forward a little bit later, I was in a development business, and I was a senior guy in that group, heading it all up. But they brought up some people from Wilmington, Delaware in the US. We were operating in Canada. And I had more experience. I was the top guy. I realized I wasn't being paid as much as the guys that were coming in from the US. And when we were having this meeting, nobody paid attention to me. They just paid attention to them. And I realized, you know what? Unless you're going to move me down to Wilmington, Delaware, I'm a U.S. citizen, so move me down to the States where you can have the recognition and credibility, or I'm out of here. And I literally said at that point in time, that was it. I said, I don't see the future in the organization. Everybody else saw my future in the organization, but you had to toe the line. You had to follow everything that the corporation, the organization was saying. And for most people, it doesn't matter because it wasn't their money. It wasn't anything else. You just had to follow. And I realized I couldn't do that. I couldn't follow that pattern. And so I got out. It so happened shortly after, a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come to work with me? I need some help in marketing." And I thought it was in the product chemical business, actually in the cleaning business. I ended up with 250 people working for me. And 24 hours a day in the cleaning business, so I hadn't been in. And then the final piece of that, if you need to knock 3 legs off the stool, this was the third one. I've been called to a meeting on Sunday night. This is a friend of mine who owns the business, and called a meeting on a Sunday night, which is unusual. And I'm sitting on the plane between Toronto and Ottawa, and I hear 2 people talking behind me about the company they had just bought. Not only is it the company that I worked for, it was also a company because I realized I couldn't stay in this company been there a couple of years, that actually asked me to come in for an interview. So they interviewed me to see what was going on with the company. So I knew on the plane before I even got to the meeting that I was out. I was gone. I was going to be history.
Oh, man.
So I walked into that meeting, and even at that point, I wasn't really super upset. I don't know why. I walked in the meeting, and shortly after that, I came out and called home and say to my wife, Karen, the business has been sold and I'll be out. So even though they hadn't told me yet, and it was just a matter of time because you could see the writing on the wall. And so at that point, I knew I had to start, but it was sort of a 3-year process to come through. And so how did it happen? Well, it happened as I think it goes, Hemingway says it, how'd you go broke? Slowly at first and then suddenly. And so that's exactly what happened, is that slowly all of the structure got taken away, and maybe because I allowed it to. And then here it is. I was then going to be out on my own, and I couldn't start anything else, Mike. I couldn't go work for somebody else. I was offered another job. I was offered to be VP of another company. It was a normal stepping stone to come out of a big organization as a sales manager and go to be VP, a small one, or president, whatever it was going to be. And I couldn't do it. And I then had to start it on my own. And so it was one of those things where I just totally, either intentionally or unintentionally, cut off all my other avenues. So I only had one option left. And maybe that's the way I had to do it. But that was the really start of me becoming an entrepreneur. And that was back in 1989.
And let me thank you for that. Let me ask you a few questions. The cleaning business that you were in, what specifically were you doing? I
was the VP of half of Toronto, eastern half of Toronto. So I had 250 people that were cleaning anywhere from office buildings to commercial spaces to malls.
Okay. So like a janitorial type.
Totally janitorial business. And I had 250 people. And it's also realized that I was not of the same ethnicity. That most of them were Portuguese. And so having to talk about having to learn how to work with people that you hadn't normally worked before, because I'd worked on the 27th floor of the Toronto Dominion Center, sort of in what people might call an ivory tower, working for DuPont. And now here I was on the ground floor. Okay. But yeah, the janitorial business, I'll still remember knowing an inspection was coming up at a Chinese mall out there, cleaning a toilet at 5:00 in the morning in my 3-piece suit, so make sure it would pass inspection. So nice. It was a different world back then.
And this interview that you talked about, I wasn't sure that I connected that. So you had interviewed with these folks that were on the plane prior?
Well, what happened was I knew the company was being sold and things were up, and that I wasn't going to. I'd been there just under 2 years, and I apologize, I didn't fill in all the pieces. And so I thought I'd go look around, and I didn't want to stay in the janitorial business, but because you're in that field, when you either, and I can't honestly tell you, Mike, whether they approached me or I approached them. But probably my name was out there. It wasn't certainly as easy as it is today with all the, Indeeds and job opportunities and LinkedIn's places to connect. So anyway, but I did go for an interview for a spot that they said they had at the point in time, and it was within 2 months, maybe even a month, that everything else unfolded where I was. So,
okay.
Writing my book, Ownershift, was one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. I did my best to share my stories and lay it all out there, and the response has been awesome. If you're looking for inspiration to help you create an amazing future for yourself, pick up a copy of the book, Ownershift, How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck, on Amazon, and leave a review.
And you mentioned this SCI, I think you called it. Is that right?
Serious career impediment.
Serious career impediment. What was it like? You said what it was like in the meeting when you corrected John. What was it like after the meeting?
Oh, it was really cool. Cold, so to say. And I meant, we always use cool for things that are nice. It wasn't that way at all. And there was what occurred to me at time afterwards, Mike, about that was talking about confidence. And I just had a level of confidence, either arrogance or cockiness. I don't know what it might be, maybe a combination of those things at that age of my life. And that said, I could do this. And I could say that because this is what I felt. But that part I felt honestly, it wasn't. And so, but it was, I think it was a real challenge to John that I would do that. Mm-hmm. And, we never had a great relationship. It certainly wasn't any better after that. So when you want somebody in an organization who's at a vice presidential level to be on your side, and that wasn't going to happen. So I didn't have to read between the lines too much to figure that part out.
Okay. And I was just wondering, like, wouldn't it be a great story if afterwards John said, "You know what, Gary? I thought about what you said, and then I need to listen a little bit better, or something."
Well, John, you know what? There's a lot of things that go on in understanding people. And John was a very self-made man. He didn't actually go to university. He was making it to a high level. Actually, made it down to the U.S. Headed up a large division in the United States afterwards. I didn't always keep in touch with him, but a gentleman who worked with me and still works with me, was very good friends with him. We were all in the plastics division at the time. So I never had any animosity towards John. I don't think John ever had anything for me. We'd always ask how each other were through mutual contact through us. But no, it was, what we were pretty clearly in different worlds. And my way was not going to be the way to be successful inside of DuPont. And he understood it better than I did. And from that part, I appreciated it, but it also meant that wasn't my world to be part of.
Yeah. It's kind of a good sort of early on, because like you sort of intimated, there's this Wilmington, Delaware, that's the corporate headquarters for DuPont. You sort of intimated that there's a way to get ahead, right? You got to, particularly if you're talented, right? It's not enough maybe to just be talented. You have to be talented, and then you have to sort of play. I don't know if play the game is the right thing, Gary, but you have to do the right things.
Yeah. It's Mike, we both know that, and because we've talked about your career in the past too, is that you have to have a level of confidence and self-assurance if you're going to go and do things on your own, as we call it, to be an entrepreneur. And you don't need that in an organization. You can be part of the momentum. You can be part of the flow that goes along. Bright people. I really enjoyed it immensely. Some really bright people that we worked with. I enjoyed it. And it was only as I got to the end of my time when they were doing things that I just said, this doesn't make any sense. Why am I wasting my time with all of this stuff? Why are we working with these particular consultants, and why are we doing all of this? And so the moment that you begin to think you know better and say so with your bosses, you've kind of dug your own grave. And so not that you still couldn't go ahead, but you just weren't going to be in the flow of things going on, because, I was never an upward serving person. I was always a downward serving person. And so as people are going up the ladder, they want people to serve them as they're going up, and you can get sucked along with them. I wasn't going to do that. And I think that frustrated them because I could, and I did. I think I did good things. I moved up the ladder a fair bit, but and people who were behind me who came up actually got to the management team level in the organization. So I knew I would have been able to be there. And that was a conscious decision on my part to give it all up and say, you know what, I'm going to go and take something quite uncertain because I can't see myself staying here. It just wasn't going to be satisfying to me. And that, so it is, in some respects, I got driven to an idea, but I got more pushed away from where I was because I didn't see myself fitting. And that was really the big thing.
And Gary, where did you grow up, and how did you, or when did you know you wanted to be an engineer?
Well, I grew up in the Toronto region. I was originally born in New York. My parents are Canadian. We moved to Canada when I was 2 years old. So I really grew up in Toronto area. I'd say not so much that I wanted to be an engineer. I realized when I was about 15 or 16 going through high school that if I was going to make it through academics, it was going to be in the technical field. I didn't excel in what would be traditional arts. I didn't excel in languages and other artistic ventures, but I could, if you had me, science, math, chemistry, physics, that kind of thing. So I consciously said when I was about 15 that this is the route I'm going to go. And I'll also be honest, school was never really important to me. I don't know why. It was never, it was always a means to an end. I said, okay, what are the check marks that I need to get? What needs to be checked off my list? And so I said, I knew I needed certain percentages to be able to go on to university and go on and do things. And you know what? I quite honestly only worked hard enough to do that because that was their rules and not mine. So I knew this a long time ago. So at the age of 15 or 16, I decided this is what I would do. And then my father, who was a very strong person in my life, said, Gary, get your engineering degree, be an engineer and get an MBA and you're set. He was in the oil business and had been pretty well all of his career. I didn't realize till later he'd also been an entrepreneur. But we just never really talked about that because the time when he became an entrepreneur is the expression I say is that people became an entrepreneur because you couldn't hold a job. So, it wasn't sort of positive as it is today. It was really more negative. So I trusted my father. So I said, all right, I can do sciences. I went in to be an engineer. By the time I finished 3 years of engineering, I remember being at Dow Chemical in Sarnia, Ontario, right across the border from Port Huron. And they said, oh, we want you to come back. We want you to come back full time when your time is over. And I stood up and looked around. That's the time when the all the desks were laid out in those little cubbies that had about like 4.5 foot walls, whatever, and maybe 5 feet, but I was tall enough just to look over them. And I saw people who have been there, chemical engineers have been there 5 years, 20 years, 35 years, and all the way in between. And I said, I don't want to do this. Mm. And so I said, I got to get through 4th year. I got to get my degree, and then I'll figure out what's next. So actually I took my engineering training. I never became in Canada what you call a professional engineer. And I went right on to business school after that, recognizing that's where I would go. So, it's not a traditional way, Mike. I mean, I guess I recognized from an early time in life that I was going to carve my own path. But there are things I needed to do. And I love the technical things. I have a gadget graveyard of all sorts of things that I've tried. And coach asked me one time, well, how many tablets have you got? And I just looked at Christine, who's my assistant. And she said, you got all of them. Okay. So put down all of them, And so I'm glad I did it. I've stayed in a technical business. I understood manufacturing. But I spent that time from 15 to 24 on the technical world. And then when I got out into DuPont, I realized it was about people. So the rest of my life since that point in time has been more about people, but with what I'll call a strong interest and technical background in it.
What you said something interesting. Well, you said a few interesting things, but first I want to ask you about the MBA. Has that, in retrospect, has having that helped you as an entrepreneur, Gary?
That's something I've thought about from time to time. And there are two, I'll give you this. There's 2 schools of thought about having more education and being an entrepreneur. Some people will say, no, you don't need it. You go on and do your own thing, be an entrepreneur. And I've learned to that, I'll answer that piece first. So that piece is that if you needed to have it, so it meant you completed something and you didn't start for a couple of years and then head off because you got a great idea, then you better go and complete it. All right. Because it's not not so much the degree, it's the fact that when you sit in the room with somebody, you've done it, you've been there, and you're not trying to make up for anything. And so what I felt was important was once I finished my engineering, I recognized that I would be in business. So let's get some training on business. Mm-hmm. So I think in retrospect, taking my MBA was useful for me because if you know, I spent 10 years in the corporate world before I became an entrepreneur. So if I was going to get somewhere in that corporate world, I needed to have both of those boxes checked. Yeah. All right. And so I wouldn't have had the exposure had I not got that. If you were hell bent on being an entrepreneur early on, I wouldn't suggest you need to go and get an MBA. If I was always working for a small company, but I worked for 2, multinational organizations, and that was important. So for what I did in life, it was important. Okay. For other people, I think you need to make your own judgment. If it's going to be frustrating for you, I enjoyed those couple of years. I learned an awful lot about how I could push myself, what was important to me. And so those are the things that I take away from those couple of years.
And when you were done at the cleaning business, I think you said that was 1989.
Yes.
Did I have that right?
It was. Yes, it was.
And you started your company, GCP, in 1999?
Yep.
Okay. So what transpired in between those in that 10-year
Well,
period?
because that part is missing from it, only because I started a tire recycling business right away, actually.
Oh, okay.
In 1989. And that was my first venture. And that went on for about 8 years. And we pioneered the use of liquid nitrogen to be able to freeze the tires, to break it down so it could get into roads, to crack sealant products, making a lot of the traffic cones that you see today, and playground matting and everything else. I should say I pioneered a lot of that a long time ago, more than 30 years ago, when it wasn't really very chic to do any of that stuff. And but that's what I did. So I did that. We developed the units, made them commercially viable, sold them a dozen of those around the world. That was really a pure startup from that standpoint, as GCP was.
Okay.
And but I had other partners, and when it got sold, it just wasn't I just wasn't the fit anymore. But yeah, that was my first venture. So 10 years later, I did another one.
So you made the equipment to recycle tires.
Yep.
Sounds like, and that's interesting. The nitrogen. So you freeze the tire, you break it, and so you separate the steel from the rubber that way. Is that what happens? Or
yeah, because I had the chemical engineering background and the training, we designed it as like a refinery. So the tires were chopped first. The big pieces were taken down to small. We had a chamber that was 40 feet long that was tilted. Nitrogen went in one end, liquid nitrogen in one end, tires went in the other. So it would freeze it down, had to get below -20. And then we would drop it into a hammer mill. Hammer mills were all built below ground. Because the fiber and the steel and the rubber all freeze at different temperatures, the smashing it with the hammers allowed it to break the pieces away. And then from there, we went into a sort of a more elaborate separation process, magnetics, of course, and separation machines, because when the rubber breaks up, it breaks up into what's seemingly random, but it breaks up into a very consistent particle size distribution. And so we go from those particle size, the various ones, we'd separate those into the right sizes, because larger particles could go differently than the smaller particles and so forth. The smaller ones could end up being recombined with plastics and other, back into other fine, where they needed fine materials, for example, like crack sealants, whether you wanted that. Coarser ones could end up into landscaping and into that. We help pioneer all this. You've probably seen a lot of the football fields and soccer fields that have the black stuff kick up. So
yeah, sure.
We worked with sports turf out of Montreal before they could pay with their bills to be able to put rubber and sand into artificial turf to replace natural grass. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I look back on and say, yeah, I'm glad I did a lot of those things, but a lot of people made a lot more money out of that than I ever did. But it was some people talk about success to significant. I was significant before I was successful, because I thought we got all these tires done out there. And maybe I like to say in my own ego that I've been responsible for recycling more tires than anybody else, and I still do today. The rubber we use today is still recycled material. So that's sort of been the basis for me. But go ahead.
Have you kept up on that industry? Like
no.
just out of curiosity or anything?
No.
Okay.
No. I part of it was that it was a really down and dirty business. I mean, very much so. There was a lot of cash with respect to how tires were being handled, a lot of politics. Big companies hadn't got into it yet, and everybody who got into that business just figured they knew better than everybody else. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to be in business where ignorance survives. And so I said, I'm going to get out of this, and which I did, but I had nothing to start to, so I had to. It took me a couple of years to fold into something else, get recovery technologies going. But it's something I needed to do. And when I left it, Mike, I had no regrets. I was gone. I was done. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it really toughened you up. So there's go ahead.
So where did the idea come from, and the recovery to play off
technologies? Yeah, recovery technologies.
The recovery from you leaving that very difficult experience to saying, you know what, I'm going to try it again with GCP.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, because I had worked with GCP, people had been in touch with me. I'd been around. I'd been involved in the scrap tire business, I would call it, and on the association. And I got approached a few years earlier if I would help a company in China help sell its equipment. And I thought, oh, wow, God, China, they sell all sorts of equipment. I think I can manage doing that. Anyway, so I advised the husband and wife couple out of Chicago for a couple of years, no compensation or anything. I just did that. And then when the time came for me to leave Recovery Technologies, and I didn't have anything, I just started to do some work with Strategic Coach. I got a son getting ready almost to go to college. So, sort of things needed to happen again. And I was also in my 40s. And I said, I don't have a pension. I don't have anything else built up. So the next thing I do is got to work. Like, if you want to, as it happened, there's another piece. This one had to work. But so I was put in touch with a factory who's still the largest supplier to us back in 98, I would say 1998. And we started working a little bit together and seeing what we could do before I had left the previous company. And so when 1999 came along, I told him no, I wasn't going to work with him for a couple of years. And then when I realized I had nothing else to do, I said, well, I might as well try this. And I could see that the wave was going to come from China. And I decided I did not want to be on the bottom of that wave. And you talked about me being an author. The first book I wrote is called 𝙇𝙚𝙖𝙧𝙣. And 𝙇𝙚𝙖 is the expression for a trusted relationship in Mandarin. And I could see the wave was coming. And I said, well, I don't want to be underneath it. Can I get on top of it? And so we started paddling as they would if you were a surfer and you start paddling out there, and we caught the wave and happened to be, now more than 20 years. I figured maybe 10 years was until people would figure things out, but I guess they're not as smart as I think that they are sometimes, Mike. But so that's how that piece happened to come along almost by accident, but certainly the background had prepared me for it.
Hey everybody, if you like my content and want to hear more from me, go to my website, www.𝘾𝙘𝙘𝙬𝙗.com right now and sign up for my newsletter. It'll come to your inbox every Thursday with stories that will help you inspire, activate, and maximize your greatness.
Okay. So you, if I understood the timeline right there, so you started in strategic coach when you were still with
Recovery Technologies. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and the thing about strategic coach is that because in a big corporation, you're always getting trained. When I got out of that, I said, well, what am I going to do now? You're on your own. You're like, literally, that's the scariest part. You're really on your own. And so when I got introduced to it and I met Dan back in April of 1991 at an intro presentation, I said, either this guy's really crazy or he's really smart, because I think the same way that he does. And I said, he promised a couple of things to us. And I said, all right, if that's what he's going to do, I need to do something. And so I joined in November 11th, 1991 as a client. And so it was really crazy because 85-90% of the people are all financial services, and I come in and talk about tire recycling.
That's what I was thinking.
That's a fish out of water. You know how that is.
Yeah.
Today it's not so bad, but back then it was like. And then everything they gave, all the concepts, I had to translate into my own use. Maybe that's why they liked me so much, because I was able to make it all workable from what Dan Sullivan had pulled together back in those early days.
So smart, by the way, to get involved in something like that so early in your entrepreneurial career. I know I waited way too long, to get involved in something that could help me understand how to be what I am and also get better at it. Yeah, I thought it was good, so I thought I could do it all on my own. Have you ever met anybody like me, Gary?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have that, but I somehow, either by instinct or whatever, knew that I couldn't do it all, and I didn't want to. So for some reason, I was able to gather other people around me, even at an early stage. So Coach didn't talk an awful lot about it back then, but it certainly helped me put, as people call it, balance or harmony in my life today. That back then, which I think there was great other dangers in my personal life had I not done so.
So if we were looking at GCP in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and we were looking at it today in 2022, what's the difference?
I want to say one thing first as we start this. We started off with a very interesting business model for what was at the time, because we have no inventory, we have no assets, all we have is relationships. And that's the way we started. And that's the way it still is today. And what I didn't realize when you look at, we've talked about Abundance 360 and Salim Ismail talking about exponential organizations. It really was the model for what exponential organizations are, because you're not tied to any capital. You're not tied to any particular manufacturing. So that's a basis that I got started literally because I didn't have the money to do it. And so I was able to get my suppliers to wait for payment until after I got paid, which allowed us to grow. So when I look at it, so the essence of why I started back then is still the same. What did shift for us is that we took on more and more responsibility ourselves to be able to find the suppliers, work with the suppliers, and with the customers. So we went from one product to multiple products. We went from having one person in China to an office in China. We went to having reps. And so we continued to expand our reach of products. And I think far more diligent, far more understanding how important quality is, how important communication is. And so in a lot of ways, the essence of the company is the same, Mike, but our ability to be able to expand and take on more risk, if you want to call it, take on more suppliers, has grown greatly over that period of time.
And the no inventory, no assets thing, Gary, can you help me and people listening understand how you supply products to customers without having inventory or assets?
Yeah, that's what we did is I determined that what we would do is we would want to bypass the traditional importer wholesalers style of business. And part of it is because I didn't really want to manage it. I wanted to keep the organizational structure and the corporation structure pretty clean. We're sitting here in Canada. The majority of our business is in the United States. Laws are all different. State laws are different, and taxes are different. So I wanted to keep that as clean as possible. So what we determined was who could deal with full containers, because that would be the most economical way. So we looked at who are the customers who could bring in full containers, so we could help grow to full container business, starting at half a container, so that they would carry the inventory and they would be the distributor or the converter for it. So we were intentionally did that. But we also knew that we would cut off a part of the opportunity for the business because of that. But what allowed us, and then we had to operate on trust, Mike. So because in the end, our customer is going to know who the supplier is, and the supplier is going to know who the customer is.
Right.
And as most as I can, I try to avoid what I call a one-to-one relationship, where I have one customer buying from one factory, or one factory supplying one customer. That's much easier to get around. So I really like in the old organizational matrix, so that we would supply multiple products to a customer, and that customer would end up, and the factory would also sell to multiple customers directly. And so the rest of it was all built on trust. I said, all right, and I went over there. I met all the factories, and basically met all the customers to begin with. Certainly not the case today by any means, but to make sure that we could deal with the right people. There's some that didn't work out, but most of the ones we've had have stayed with us for quite a while, both on the customer and on the factory side of things. And
so the way that you make money is in the sale price between your supplier and the customer, and your customer is essentially its own distributor.
Yeah, we buy and sell.
Yeah. Okay.
And I always made point that we work on behalf of the customer. We find things. We're good at finding things and developing things. That's really my strength and background in developing other product or businesses. And so the engineering, that's where the engineering background comes in really handy. But I always say we work on behalf of the customer. And it's kind of quasi that we work really exclusively with certain suppliers as well, because that just makes for a better relationship. But we'd always look at it as our job to find out what the customer needs. That's always been our basis.
And the customers that you're selling to, Gary, what do they look like, and what are they buying?
Yeah, we've articulated them as being between $5 million and $100 million at either industrial distributors or converters, that they convert the product into gaskets. We're very strong in the gasket industry, which requires a lot of technical specifications. Okay, so gaskets have to have a right hardness, the right thicknesses, the right colors, the right patterns, or everything on them. So we chose to be in the technical world as opposed to it's still a commodity in a lot of respects, but being able strong technically is where we were at. So that's what we focus on. And they also have to be well financed, and they have to have a solid customer base for us to be successful with them. We don't really work well with startups, even though we were one. We work better with those who are established and who can see the value of what it is we do. Hopefully, they've tried to do stuff on their own. They've tried to import themselves, and it's been difficult. We certainly didn't deal with the same political climate, geopolitical climate that we have today in 2022, back in the early, back 20 years ago. But that being neither here nor there situation. But that's how we did it. The other thing that I base it on is that because I had the recycling business, I said, we're going to use recycled rubber. And I'm going to bring recycled rubber into a commercial space, and which never really had been done on a large scale before. So I said, this is what, and I was kind of pig-headed in some respect. I said, this is what people need. This is what they need to have. And we just pushed it and pioneered it. And we've had exceptionally few failures of any sort. Mostly any failures that have occurred is because people have picked the wrong product and the wrong polymer. But that was knowing the technical aspects, knowing the business, and coming at it from what our strengths were. But
okay. So you're, to a gasket manufacturer, for example, you're the raw material supplier, and then they value add into the gasket, and then they sell it to their customer.
Yeah. So, for example, recently I was down in Phoenix, and I saw one of our customers down there, and we supply red rubber. Red rubber is what primarily gets used into the plumbing industry, and they've got these very large tables, computerized, and they are what they call, will gang cut all the gaskets. They'll all be interlaced, everything else, and all the holes are done. And there's just machines are pumping these things out 9 hours a day, and using the rubber. So, and they pull them off, and they've all gaskets are different sizes, so they minimize their waste. And you know what? They like the product, so it's clean, it cuts clean, that everything works. It's right hardnesses, and it looks right. Not blemishes. So there are a lot of, things you don't necessarily think about, but the surface finish has to be good, has to be clean. There can't be differences in thicknesses, because then it won't seal properly. So little things we take for granted. And of course, most of the time, the business that I'm in, Mike, nobody ever sees. Just the supply chain issues of the last couple of years have now brought this to the surface. But the reason why I like the rubber business is you can't make anything that moves or operates without having rubber or silicone. Everything needs it. Now, whether it's ours or not, but it goes into that world.
And the recycled component, is China recycling tires to get the rubber, or is the rubber coming from other sources there, and then they're making it into the rubber?
No, it all comes from China. And
it does,
if you go back, because China was cut off from the world for 50 years through the early part of the communist period. So they had to use whatever they had internally.
Okay.
And so one of the reasons why I ended up going to China was I could find everything right there. I could find the machines weren't new. The rubber machines around the world were pretty much the same. Labor was a key component. They could teach people how to operate that. And then the other part was the raw material could be supplied right from China.
Okay.
And so I called it a whole, for me, it was all made in China component, and all we dealt with was freight. And for a while, their freight was not as big a deal. It cost less to come from Shanghai and Tianjin to go to LA than it did from go to LA to New York. So back then, so you just looked at the main trade-off with the equipment being the same. You had the raw material and you had the labor, and those were reasons. But you had to have the quality, and that's one thing that we really worked on with them, because nobody made what we wanted off the shelf. We had to go with every single factory and get them to understand the standards, understand what we needed, understand the cost structure, and be able to make it the way it was required for North American standards.
And the reason I asked that question, I'm glad I'm glad I asked it, because for a long time, like for the standard recycling industry in the US, China was sort of the market for receiving all of that stuff, and then they would process it and then use it, I suppose. So I wondered if tires were the same thing. In the intro, in the bio, we talked about GCP being, forward-thinking, digital-first company now, and I'd like to understand what that means.
Okay. Well, that comes from a lot of the work that we've done with abundance and looking forward. And we decided, myself and Christine, who works with me really on a lot of the IT and the HR pieces together. And I actually believe that HR and IT have converged in a lot of ways. That you to have good HR, you got to have the proper IT and communication capability. But anyway, she came along board with me, and I said years ago, I said, look, I want to be in a position, because we live up here in the Northeast, that if we have a snowstorm and people can't get in, what do we do? How can we operate? How can we operate if nobody can come to the office? And so we consciously looked at this and said, years ago, say, what do we need to do? And so before the pandemic even started, everybody was moved from a desktop to a laptop. We moved all to the Google platform so we could communicate all internally. And when the day came that we had to close the doors in March of 2020, we literally closed them at 5:00 on Tuesday, and Wednesday morning, we held our first team meeting all on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And we were communicating not only with everybody and our customers. The only thing we didn't have nailed down was the phone system, which we've now since done. And now our phone system it was already a VoIP system, but now the phone system is set up that it's just like you can take it from your laptop, you can take it from your own phone, you can conference call just like anybody would be in the office. I always have somebody answer the phone because that's something that I consider to be important. So that was the first step, and then the second step is when the pandemic hit, is we taught our customers how to use Zoom, how to work with it. And so we went beyond the product side and said, look, this is how you communicate with people, because they were being isolated, and some people would have to go into the factories and into their warehouses and into the production facilities, but others, the offices weren't, so they didn't really have communication. So we worked with them on how to communicate. And then we spin it forward a little bit more recently. In the last 2 years, we have been developing a software platform using artificial intelligence to help companies predict what they need to order. Quite simply, we call it predictive ordering. And we've had that work going on because of all the supply chain disruptions. But I've seen this for the 40 years that I've been in business. Because of the supply chain disruptions, we said we've got to find a way to help people manage the complexity of the data, because now they got to think about not just 3 or 4 months out, minimum 6 months. That's not good enough. 9 months to 12 months out. The complexities, and what's the business going to be like out there? What's it going to be like then? It's so far away. What are the pricing going to be like? So we started working on that, and we gave our first live demo last week. We're doing another one now, and we're really pulling that together where we can actually help people do the heavy lifting. So, and then we declared our own company as a virtual company back at the beginning of 2022. And now we're working on how do we all communicate? How do we work together? What become the standards of what it is that we need to do? So, and that meant all your processes have to be very robust. So we have a digital platform task force, and we're going through every single one of the pain points in the organization and saying, how can we make it easier, cheaper, faster, and deliver bigger results? And how do we make sure that everything is available on the cloud so we can operate from anywhere? And to that extent, over a year ago, we moved our accounting manager, and she and her husband were from Germany. They had a couple of children now. All the family had gone back to Germany from Canada. So we moved her to Germany, and she's been working out of Germany for more than a year now. And so we have had an office in China. We got a rep in Mexico City, in Houston, another one in Western Canada. We're spread out here in and around the Toronto area, Southern Ontario. And so we just figured out how to make it work.
Hey everybody, just a quick pause here to let you know how much I appreciate you making time for my podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, please become one today and leave a review and tell a friend. And now let's get back to the show.
And we don't need to see people physically. We go to see them. So even though we have formal offices that we come to, which I still like to come into, and where I am doing this podcast from, we literally just said, how can we operate in the digital world in a way that we can be in a physical business, but still have a very strong digital presence?
And the power of no assets and no inventory gets magnified here.
Yeah. Right? Because now you're not managing anything.
Yeah.
I've always said we manage information and relationships. So
that's so funny, right? Because you deliver product, real physical product, but you manage. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just thinking there's a lesson in there.
Well, I had an older gentleman who I had a great deal of respect for, who was a researcher and a chemist. And he told me a long time ago, and I took him to China with me to help the development. He says, Gary, you're in the service business. He repeated that expression. I can't tell you how many times for 3 years before I finally got into my head. Now, he's a product guy. He was a product guy. That's what he grew up his whole life with. He said, you're in the service business. And Duncan McKillop, his name, I always have great respect for him. And he was right. So that turned my head around. And so we got paid for product, but our value is always in the service. And I always said, so the lesson that we took from it, whether it makes so much sense to you, is that we just said our product may be a commodity, but our service isn't. So we've continued to look at how can we up the value of the services that we provide for people.
Yeah. So that's something powerful for everybody that's in a quote unquote, right, commoditized business, right? So you're in a commoditized business. What are you going to do? You're going to fight, to the bottom with everybody else who's sort of just, focused on price only, or are you going to figure out a way to accept that the product you deliver is maybe a commodity, but the way in which you deliver it can be completely different than what other people do and have a ton of value.
And we totally got played that in the last 12 months when the cost of freight went from like $3,000 a container to $30,000. And we always made it simple for everybody. So we delivered it, all the costs included. Well, trying to raise your prices when that world is used to single digits at best and over the course of years to go up 30, 40, 50, and in one case, 60% was enormously challenging. And we really had to come to the point that we were losing our own value, because I've always felt the margins that you get are related to value. The lower the margin, the less value you bring. It's purely simple in my end, whether rightly or wrongly, but that's the way I looked at it from our organization. And so we were really struggling. And in fact, we were delivering product being underwater. Well, when you don't have inventory, you're now not contributing to any cost, because when you're underwater, for us, we're pulling money out of our pockets. We're not even contributing to overheads. We just said, no, we have to stop this. We have to value ourselves. And so we continued to move the product costs up, freight costs up, separate things. And we said, you know what? This is not our fault. But having to come and value yourself was really the most difficult thing we had to do in the last 12 months. And say, if people can't buy it, that's not our fault. Yeah. We have a service to provide. We're not, and we changed because we went in the business, if you want to, long ago, that we were 30% below the marketplace because we needed to be, because people didn't trust the product from China. We eventually became more of a market leader, and therefore our costs were kind of set. But in the last year, we had to say, price is not our issue. It's we provide access to material. That's the benefit that we bring, and we could always get it. And so just how long it took to get there, what the final cost was going to be. And so we had to really switch our frame of reference to say, and understand, and for other people listening, what is your value? And our value is giving them access to products. That was totally our value.
That's a really interesting segue, because I want to spend the rest of the time talking about your work as a strategic coach, associate coach, right? Or whatever the right word is. And even there in that example, you basically had to, you're teaching this all the time, right? About value creation and all of this stuff. And you're faced with a situation, and in your own business, maybe your natural instinct is, okay, we're going to absorb this because that's what you do. Right. And then you were like, wait a second. No. We have to figure out a way that we're not the bad guy here, right? That we're not the one. So, you had your own sort of lab, I guess. So you mentioned joining strategic coach when you were with the tire business. You became an associate coach. I guess I want people to understand what that means, and I want to know. So you've coached, I guess, thousands of entrepreneurs probably now in 25 years.
Yep.
What do you help them? What do you bring to them? What does the program bring to them, and why do you love it?
Well,
I assume you love it.
Well, Mike, you're right. You don't stay unless you love it. They won't keep you either. Your clients won't stay with you because when you coach the same people over and over again, year after year, you have to get better. I have to get better every year. And to that extent, I had a person who's a friend, but also a client from here, and went away from me for a while and came back. He said, when he came back, he said, Gary, you're different. I don't feel any different, because we have to continue to evolve, we have to continue to grow. So I like that part of it. I like the challenge that that's what I had to do each year, and makes me think all the time. And what it means is that it really is quite a commitment to be a coach, because it goes into my calendar. Like right now, here it is in the early part of 2022. My calendar is booked out to the end of 2023. And by the time this airs, I'll be booked out into 2024. All right. So you have to be willing to make that kind of commitment to do that. And the other part is that you've really got to love people. And, maybe it's probably simply put that my purpose in life is helping people and organizations grow. And so when I was doing nothing, like trying to figure out what life was going to be like back in 1998, I was driving down the road one time on a very sunny day in October. And I said, you know what, I want to be involved in $1 billion worth of business, but doesn't mean my business is going to be $1 billion. And so I just began to start coaching, and I found out that was the way to do it. So how can I help other people grow their businesses and grow their lives so that I get to influence that way in a positive way, not for me, but for them. And that's what's really driven me, Mike, is to be able to say that I get the opportunity to help other people, help ourselves, bring from my own business, as you said, my lab back to coach, and from coach back to our own business. And I've been able to make the two quite complementary to each other.
And we talked about at the beginning, you sort of being an outlier as a tire recycling equipment manufacturer amongst these other, financial planners, which is largely what Coach was designed around at the beginning. What are you seeing now? And who are the types of people that you would encourage to get involved or to reach out to you?
Well, in fundamentally, anybody who considers themselves an entrepreneur and has the desire to continue to grow their business without sucking up all of their life, their personal life with it, I'd suggest they go to Coach, because that's what you asked the question, and that's what Coach really does. Coach helps us understand what we do best. We call it unique ability, and then how to organize our world around us so that we can be at our best all the time. There's a couple of great books out now. One's called Who Not How. Again, understanding that we are limited in terms of what we're capable. Mike, you talked earlier about wanting to do it all. Well, there's a reason. We have to do all of those things. And I don't want to slough that off at the time. We have to do it all to understand it. But we also got to understand when it causes us frustration. And what Coach does is gives you permission. And you're in a room of people who, in a community of people who think the same way. And so you're not alone anymore, because entrepreneurs are quite isolated in a lot of ways, particularly in the business you were in and the business that I'm in. We don't have other people around you literally can go and talk to, because they don't necessarily understand it. But the other thing that's been great about Coach, it doesn't matter what business you're in. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your background has been, what schooling or anything else that you've done. If you choose to be an entrepreneur, you have similar issues to everybody else. And so no matter who they are, we can be all great coaches to each other. And that's just a wonderful weaving process that I love to see in pulling people out, helping them be more than they thought they could ever be. It's always been my goal, whether it was for my own children or my team here, or our vendors in China, our customers, but also all the coaches. And I really, really appreciated that opportunity to do that. And that pushes me to be better and look at what's next and what's coming. And that's exciting, because otherwise, what are you going to do with your life? When your career might come to an end prematurely when you're still at the top of your game. So.
And what is next? I mean, you got your calendar almost booked out to 2024 on the Coach side, but what's next for you? What's next for GCP?
Well, I grew the business 10 times from 2004 to 2014. And we haven't been able to replicate that again, which doesn't sit well with me. So I realized from the physical world, whether you're inventory or not, you have physical limitations. And so I'm looked at how do we get out of those physical limitations. So I look at the problems that we've got out there. It's one thing that's Coach is really good at. We call that DOS, dangers, opportunities, and strengths. And so what are the dangers our customers are facing? What are their opportunities? What are their strengths? And of course, the supply chain challenge has been the big one. So I try and blend everything, merge everything together. Converge, I guess, is probably a better term for that. And so I've been fascinated with AI. I've been fascinated with 3D printing. And we've now found a way that we can capture all the data that we've had, because we get great data on all of our customers, and be able to pull together what people need to order and how they need to order. What does their container look like? And not that it answers everybody's questions, but I call it the 80-20 rule. Can we do 80% of the heavy lifting so they can spend their time on the 20% that they can adjust for what they need to? So what I'm excited about is that I see now a way with what we've got with this platform. This is the first piece of it. We can sell it. We can use it internally, but we can also use it for people outside our in any industrial space. My son, who works with me, has got the idea of doing what some people call like matching, but have an industrial products online brokerage platform, because finding products from around the world is challenging. And so we'd bring people onto that platform, be a paid platform. We manage it. If they want things built, can find out. We're good at developing, so we can do the development work. And the other part is that we can handle logistics. So if you want to handle logistics anywhere in the world, we can do that. So I see an opportunity to take the core of what we've done right now and really expand it to go to the 10 times, or maybe even more than 10 times beyond where we are right now. And now we're not tied to the physical limitations. We're not bumping up against one other company and who we sell to and who somebody else buys from. Right. And that to me is really exciting, because it takes what we've learned, but also puts it into the realm where we're more into the future side of the business.
Yeah, I like that. It's basically taking your model and then saying, who else, what other companies can we apply this to that could, yeah. I think your son's right. I think there's something there.
Well, I hope so, because I mean, I like to do the things that I like to do. And not that I'm going anywhere, but the day-to-day business for me is one where I've got great people, great organization. We've been complimented about that. And so I honestly don't worry about it. I watch the numbers, and it allows me to work on what I think is coming next, where they don't have to be afraid of that, what's coming next, because I'll go do that part for them. Like the geese that fly, there's always somebody out front, cutting the wind, but they'll alternate and move up. But I'm the guy that goes and cuts the air out front. So see what's coming.
Well, Gary, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for being on the show. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I'd say the only thing I'd say is that if you're really frustrated where you are, then you might not always have the driving force to go and do something. But look at what would excite you. As we know, all entrepreneurs get excited about the things that they do, but their life also changes. And I'd say take the leap. If you can take that leap, that's the one thing that the entrepreneurs can do. It's worth it, because there's no better joy than being able to be a great career service to a lot of other people by your ideas and not feel constrained. So I'd say, if you're going to do it, go for it.
Well, there you go. You heard it from a pro. Take the leap. I like it. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you very much, Mike.